How does Congress legally get away with all their unconstitutional activity? The Federal Reserve? The Patriot Act? The Healthcare Bill? Cap and trade? Federal income taxes? What follows is fact, not fiction. It is not conspiracy theory or patriot myth. It is all 100% documented. The truth is that the United States you believe to be a country is nothing more than a private, for-profit business operated by an unlawful Congress for the benefit of a handful of international bankers and controlled by the Vatican. America is a corporate slave plantation.
By this scheme, the living people assumed the role of guarantor, accommodation party, and surety for the legal fiction that functions for the benefit and enrichment of the creditors. In this scenario, it is the strawman, not the living being, that operates throughout the entirety of today's law and commerce. One need only look at the social security card, school records, passports, driver's licenses, credit cards, utility bills, etc., all of which are always in all capital letters, just as are gravestones of dead people all over the world and the parties to a dispute on the caption of a court brief, to see the ubiquitous use of the strawman in today's commercial and legal world. A surety is defined as the one who is responsible to pay. The real man is the surety and liable by contract to pay for the debts and obligations of the strawman, even though the real man is not, nor does he own, nor does he receive title to, anything purchased or accomplished by use of the strawman. The strawman is owned by US Inc. and the banks that purchase bonds issued by the Treasury against the strawman as credit. As stated, US Inc. is bankrupt, and has been since 1933. US Inc. has no gold or silver to pay any debts and is civilly dead. Having neither possession, nor right of possession, nor legal capacity to use gold and silver, i.e., lawful money, the only asset left to finance the continued operation of the bankrupt US Inc., i.e., the government, was the people, who were hypothecated as the credit collateral to finance the bankruptcy. US Inc. uses the substance and labor of the people to finance its entire operation, reorganization and insurance underwriting. The scenario is extremely sophisticated, resulting in the operation of a vast and pervasive administration of legalized peonage, slavery, permanent indentured servitude, and collectivism, communism, wherein the people have forfeited all standing in law and are dead to rights. The powers that be borrow against your life, rights, and labor to finance their administration of the system they use to exploit, plunder, and dominate you, all under the presumption that they are acting as your agents to fulfill your own requests.
Who says we need a license? A license is a sin. A license is a permit to sin. A conscientious objector is not what you thought it to be. Oh, in the combat sense of the word it may be, but it hits a lot closer to home than that. Are you licensed? Yeah, do you have a license? If so, you're condemned by your creator. That statement was thrown in to get you to discover a well-hidden truth. A crafty bargainer has duped you. Read, at least to the end of definition, and tell me I'm wrong. The objection of a conscientious objector must be founded on deeply held moral, ethical, and religious convictions about right or wrong. Man, one of Adam's progeny, cannot be licensed. One of the biggest devices of the confiscation and asset forfeiture plague and the state stampede of licensing is the use of personification to confiscate property. Personification is the idea that things or objects possess the free will and capacity to commit crimes. It is an idea deeply rooted in the practice of witchcraft, the occult, and devil worship. Objects are supposed to get that kind of power from the devil, or a curse. A license issued by a fiction, corporation, government entity, etc. is a permit rendered to another fictional legal entity to do what would be otherwise against natural law. The license is a permit for you to lie to your senses, allow a fiction to rule over truth. Definitions follow. A license to lie to the senses equals license, a permit to lie to the senses. As rule over his creation. You have rule over what you create. If the state created you, they have rule over you. So, next time you hear, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, remind that fat $1 that Caesar is dead, thank God for that. There is much information you must have in order to conduct and plan your service to God and country. For example, you must know who your adversaries are and what they plan and plot in order to control, enslave and destroy you.
There are no judicial courts in America and there has not been any since 1789. Judges do not enforce statutes and codes. Executive administrators enforce statutes and codes, FRCV. GE 281 U.S. 464, Keller v. PE 261 U.S. 428, 1 Stat. 138-178. There have not been any judges in America since 1789. There have just been administrators, FRCV. GE 281 U.S. 464, Keller v. PE 261 U.S. 428 1 Stat. 138-178 10. According to the GATT, you must have a Social Security number. House Report 103-826. We have one world government, one world law and a one world monetary system. The UN is a one world super government. No one on this planet has ever been free. This entire planet is nothing more than a slave colony. There has always been a one world government. It is just that now it is much better organized and has changed its name as of 1945 to the United Nations. Our Human Capital, Executive Order 13037. The UN has financed the operations of the United States government for over 50 years and now owns every man, woman and child in America. The UN also holds all of the land in America in fee simple. The good news is we don't have to fulfill our fictitious obligations. You can discharge a fictitious obligation with another's fictitious obligation. The Depression and World War II were a total farce. The United States and various other companies were making loans to others all over the world during the Depression. The building of Germany's infrastructure in the 1930s, including the railroads, was financed by the United States. That way those who call themselves kings, prime ministers, and Führer, etc. could sit back and play a game of chess using real people. Think of all of the Americans, Germans, etc. who gave their lives thinking they were defending their countries which didn't even exist. The millions of innocent people who died for nothing. Isn't it obvious why Switzerland is never involved in these fiascos? That is where the Bank of International Settlements is located. Wars are manufactured to keep your eye off the ball. You have to have an enemy to keep the illusion of government in place.
And our interpretation of them follows. The USA, a corporation of the English Crown, is bankrupt, and has been since at least 1788. The Articles of Confederation states in Article 12, all bills of credit emitted, moneys borrowed, and debts contracted by, or under the authority of Congress, before the assembling of the United States, in pursuance of the present Confederation, shall be deemed as considered a charge against the United States, for payment and satisfaction whereof the said United States, and the public faith are hereby solemnly pledged. The Founding Fathers, as constitutors, acknowledged and reorganized the debt in the U.S. Constitution 1787, Article 6, hence Constitution. Bankruptcy occurred on January 1, 1788 based on 21 loans that the United States of America received from the King of England dating from February 28, 1778 through July 5, 1782, the repayment of which had been ratified by Congress on January 22, 1783. The United States Bank, created in 1791, was a private bank, with 18,000 of 25,000 shares owned by England. No de jure, constitutional Congress has existed since March 27, 1861 when seven Southern states walked out of Congress, leaving Congress without a quorum for adjourning and therefore ending sine die. That which is called Congress today assembles and acts under the authority of the President acting in capacity of being Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, under emergency war powers rule, i.e. law of necessity, i.e. no law, see 12 Stat. 319, which has never been repealed and exists in Title 50 U.S.C. Sections 212, 213, 215, Appendix 16, 26 CFR Chapter 1 Section 303.1-6 and 31 CFR Chapter 5 Section 500.701 Penalties. Since the above referenced date, March 27, 1861, Americans have been under fascist rule via presidential executive order under the aforementioned emergency war powers, 12 U.S.C. 95a, b. Every citizen of the United States is now legally established as an enemy via the Amendatory Act of March 9, 1933, 48 Stat. 1, amending Trading with Enemy Act of October 6, 1917, H.R. 4960, Public Law No. 91. December 6, 1865, the 14th Amendment was proclaimed as ratified even though it never properly was, see below. The 14th Amendment, which is private Roman Catholic ecclesiastical trust law, constitutes a constructive, sestuique trust, a public charitable trust, PCT, that was expressly designed to bring every corporate franchise artificial person called a citizen of the United States into an inseparable merging with the government until the two are united with the power inherent in the government, not the people. To investigate is the way to know what things are really lawful. Point 1. Because of what appears to be a lawful command on the surface, many citizens, because of their respect for what only appears to be a law, are cunningly coerced into waiving their rights, due to ignorance. 2. In the above statement, the Supreme Court talks of what only appears to be law on the surface. Of what are we so ignorant that we would mistake something for law that is not law? We have grown up hearing phrases like, the law is the law, and ignorance of the law is no excuse. What is law and what makes something law? Since the origin of a thing ought to be inquired into, 3. Then it would follow that we should look into the origin of the word law to give us some idea of its meaning today. Unlike many of the terms used in the legal system of the United States, the word law does not come from the Latin, but from the Anglo-Saxon word lagu and the Middle English law, lag meaning just, right and fair. In Latin, law would be translated jus, juris, from which we take the word justice. The Romans had another word, lex, legis, from which we get the word legal, meaning statute, bill, principle, rule, contract, condition. What is legal connected by contract becomes lawful just by consent. A legal system based upon freedom has no lawful power to command until an individual binds himself to it, for lex law is derived from legar to bind, because it binds one to act. 4. All government without the consent of the governed is the very definition of slavery. 5. If the Romans, from whom we take much of the principles upon which the present legal system relies, saw fit and necessary to use two separate and distinct words, one lex and the other jus, then why do we often use them interchangeably? It is in the distinction between these two words that much of our honest confusion lies. While the law jus is the rule of right, and whatever is contrary to the rule of right is an injury. 6. We find that human laws lex, leges are born, live, and die. 7. That which bars those who have contracted will bar their successors also. 8. Therefore, the contract makes the law. 9. For our children, as well as for ourselves. We shall have world government whether or not we like it. The question is, whether world government will be achieved by conquest or consent. 10.
76 signifies the birth of the New World Order under the Crown Temple. That's when their American Crown colonies became the chartered government called the United States, thanks to the Declaration of Independence. Since that date, the United Nations, another legal Crown Temple by charter, rose up and refers to every nation as a state member. The Wizard of Oz equals the Crown Temple. This is not a mere child's story written by L. Frank Baum. What symbol does Oz stand for? Ounces? Gold? What is the yellow brick road? Bricks or ingot bars of gold? The character known as the straw man represents that fictitious all-caps legal fiction, a person, the federal U.S. government created with the same spelling as your Christian birth name. Remember what the straw man wanted from the Wizard of Oz? A brain. No legal fiction has a brain because they have no breath of life. What did he get in place of a brain? A certificate. A birth certificate for a new legal creation. He was proud of his new legal status, plus all the other legalisms he was granted. Now he becomes the true epitome of the brainless sack of straw who was given a certificate in place of a brain of common sense. What about the Tin Man? Does taxpayer identification number TIN mean anything to you? The poor Tin Man just stood there mindlessly doing his work until his body literally froze up and stopped functioning. He worked himself to death because he had no heart or soul. He's the heartless and emotionless creature robotically carrying out his daily task as if he was already dead. He's the ox pulling the plow and the mule toiling under the yoke. His masters keep him cold on the outside and heartless on the inside in order to control any emotions or heart he may get a hold of. The pitiful cowardly lion was always too frightened to stand up for himself. Of course, he was a bully and a big mouth when it came to picking on those smaller than he was. They act as if they have great courage, but they really have none at all. All roar with no teeth of authority to back them up. When push came to shove, the cowardly lion always buckled under and whimpered when anyone of any size or stature challenged him. He wanted courage from the Grand Wizard, so he was awarded a medal of official recognition. Now, regardless of how much of a coward he still was, his official status made him a bully with officially recognized authority. He's just like the attorneys who hide behind the middle courts of the Temple Bar. What about the trip through the field of poppies? They weren't real people, so drugs had no effect on them. The Wizard of Oz was written at the turn of the century, so how could the author have known America was going to be drugged? The Crown has been playing the drug cartel game for centuries. Just look up the history of Hong Kong and the Opium Wars. The Crown already had valuable experience conquering all of China with drugs, so why not the rest of the world? Who finally exposed the wizard for what he really was? Toto, the ugly, or cute, depending on your perspective, and somewhat annoying little dog. Toto means in total, altogether, Latin in toto. Notice how Toto was not scared of the great wizard's theatrics, yet he was so small in size compared to the wizard, no one seemed to notice him. The smoke, flames and hologram images were designed to frighten people into doing as the Great Wizard of Oz commanded. Toto simply went over, looked behind the curtain, the court, see the definition for curtain above, saw it was a scam, and started barking until others paid attention to him and came to see what all the barking was about. Just an ordinary person controlling the levers that created the illusions of the Great Wizard's power and authority. The veil hiding the corporate legal fiction and its false courts was removed. The wizard's game was up. It's too bad that people don't realize how loud a bark from a little dog is. How about your bark? Do you just remain silent and wait to be given whatever food and recognition, if any, your legal master gives you? Let's not forget those pesky flying monkeys. What a perfect mythical creature to symbolize the Bar Association attorneys who attack and control all the little people for the great crown wizard, the powerful and grand bankers of Oz, gold. What is it going to take to expose the wizard and tear down the court veil for what they really are? Each of us needs only a brain, a heart and soul, and courage. Then, and most importantly, we all need to learn how to work together. Only in toto, working together as one body of the King of Kings, can we ever be free or have the freedom given under God's law. Their document served to leave the door of America unlocked and ajar, so that the country's foreign enemies could surreptitiously re-enter in the days and years following the supposed War of Independence. Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton. Slavery by word and parchment idolatry. The hypocrisy and duplicity of the Federalists is responsible for modern neo-imperialism and advent of the so-called New World Order. In our opinion, these men were little more than British agents, because King George himself, the man who declared eternal war on America, could not have done as much damage to America as their actions have wrought. Such a tyrannical future where property rights would be ignored, where a massive standing army would lurk unchallengeable, where congressmen would hold office for life, where ruinous treaties would be commonplace, where presidential powers would make Nero jealous, where gold and silver would vanish from circulation to be replaced by the worthless notes of a private banking conglomeration, where the states would be reduced to mere administrative departments of the feds, and where the grasp of taxation would actually reach into the common laborer's paycheck. All this was too fantastic to be even theoretically contemplated during the ratification debates. Kenneth W. Royce, Hologram of Liberty. When the duplicitous Hamilton was questioned as to why he helped draft the Constitution, he guardedly replied, "My motives must remain in the depository of my own breast." Upon the Constitution as the most fatal plan that could possibly be conceived to enslave a free people. Ibid. No sooner was the Constitution ratified, than the oligarchs began acting tyrannically toward the American people. British agent, President George Washington, who presided over the signing of the Constitution and who was a member of the Ohio Company of Virginia, the Mississippi Company, and the Potomac Company, sent 13,000 armed troops to violently stamp out the so-called Whiskey Rebellion of 1794. This rebellion was against heavy taxation. The victims of government oppression soon discovered that they could not use the Constitution to receive justice. It contained little provision for the underclasses. It gave complete suzerainty to the courts and judges, not to the people or the states. To all intents and purposes, it was as if the War of Independence had never been fought. The Constitution merely made it possible for agents of the British Crown to operate as if they served the citizens of America. In this regard, nothing has changed. The facts about the American Revolution show that in the early days, in the mid-1770s, the colonialists suffered a series of defeats. Strategic secrets were being passed to the British. The facts also show that an American Army general, Benedict Arnold, was a traitor who plotted to surrender the fort at West Point to the British and turn the tide of war against his own side. The facts link Washington with Arnold when it comes to Freemasonry, and the facts show that the day the plot was discovered, Washington was due to meet Arnold at West Point. Washington has been working with Arnold and passing secrets to the British. Robert Cooper interview on Dan Brown's The Lost Symbol. The tyranny continued in 1798, with the Alien and Sedition Acts, which made criticism of federal officials a punishable offense. The Constitution served to strengthen the powers of the wealthy aristocratic class in America. It possessed few benefits for the average citizen, and ultimately legalized widespread acts of confiscation and extortion. As Thomas Jefferson once remarked, the natural progress of things is for liberty to yield and government to gain ground. The point is emphasized by constitutional scholar and author Kenneth W. Royce. If analyzed in contrast to history since 1787, it appears that the Constitution was purposely laden with several components designed to nearly guarantee the gradual expansion of the federal government, at the expense of the states and the people. Hologram of Liberty.
Few people are aware today that the history of the United States, since the Revolution in 1776, has been, in large part, the story of an epic struggle to get free, and stay free, of control by the European international banks. This struggle was finally lost in 1913, when President Woodrow Wilson signed into effect the Federal Reserve Act, putting the international banking cartel in charge of creating America's money. Paul Grignon, Money as Debt. Thomas Jefferson mentioned the nefarious power of the bankers directly, saying desperately, "I wish it were possible to obtain a single amendment to our Constitution, taking from the federal government their power of borrowing." After Alexander Hamilton's gang had established the Federal Bank, and the judiciary with its unlimited power, Jefferson's illusions concerning America's fate were gone. In 1821, 5 years before he died, he recorded his misgivings and foreboding. "It has long been my opinion that the germ of dissolution of our federal judiciary is in the constitution of the federal judiciary, an irresponsible body working like gravity by night and by day, gaining a little today and a little tomorrow, and advancing its noiseless step like a thief over the field of jurisdiction, until all shall be usurped from the states, and the government of all be consolidated into one. To this I am opposed, because when all government shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it will render powerless the checks provided of one government on another, and will become as venal and oppressive as the government from which we separated. Our government is now taking so steady a course as to show by what road it will pass to destruction, to wit, by consolidation first, and then corruption, its necessary consequences." Thomas Jefferson.
The term pinpoints the idea exactly and must be specific and cannot be expanded or contracted upon. However, word is quite differently defined in the standard dictionary of common words we all use. When we converse on the street, in the home, in the store, we use common words which are not terms. Term is limiting to a specific idea. Only words can be expanded or contracted upon, whereas terms cannot. Now refer to blacks above and note that they used term and not word in the definition of word. Most people would never catch it unless shown. This is how closely you have to read the past masters of deceit who are lawyers. What is white to you is black to them in the words employed in their words of art. This is never more evident than in the definitions in the IR code. Please note that every definition 7701 starts with the term. Once you understand term as a clue to words of art employed after the word term, you have half the battle won. That means throw out the standard dictionary definition we are all used to seeing and go by what they, the writers of the law, mean. They never say the word when they start the definition in any 7701 a part, now do they? Or for that matter anywhere else in the code definitions. It has to be term in order to make words work against you and for them, as they write the definitions, not us. I suggest everyone take a look at IRC 7701 of 28 other terms. Any term used in this subtitle with respect to the application of, or in connection with, the provisions of any other subtitle of this title shall have the same meaning as in such provisions. The case of the term, not word, resident, it is legally defined in United States v. Penelope, 27 Fed. Case No. 16024, which states, but admitting that the common acceptance of the word and its legal technical meaning are different, we must presume that Congress meant to adopt the latter, page 487. But this is a highly penal act, and must have strict construction.
The trouble with history is that we weren't there when it took place, and it can be changed to fit someone's belief and/or traditions, or it can be taught in the public schools to favor a political agenda, and withhold many facts. I know you have been taught that we won the Revolutionary War and defeated the British, but I can prove to the contrary. I want you to read this paper with an open mind, and allow yourself to be instructed with the following verifiable facts. You be the judge and don't let prior conclusions on your part or incorrect teaching keep you from the truth. I too was always taught in school and in studying our history books that our freedom came from the Declaration of Independence and was secured by our winning the Revolutionary War. Americans are feudal tenants on the land, allowed to rent the property they live on as long as the king gets his cut. What about self-determination, or being able to own allodial title to property, which means the king cannot take your property for failure to pay a tax? Which means you did not own it to begin with. The king allows you to use the material goods and land. Again, this is financial servitude. The ultimate ownership of all property is in the state. Individual so-called "ownership" is only by virtue of government, i.e., law, amounting to a mere user, and use must be in accordance with law and subordinate to the necessities of the state. We must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. We must make our election between economy and liberty or profusion and servitude. If we run into such debts as that we must be taxed in our meat and in our drink, in our necessaries and our comforts, in our labours and our amusements, for our callings and our creeds, as the people of England are, our people, like them, must come to labour 16 hours in the 24, and give the earnings of 15 of these to the government for their debts and daily expenses, and the 16th being insufficient to afford us bread, we must live, as they now do, on oatmeal and potatoes, have not time to think, no means of calling the mismanagers to account, but be glad to obtain subsistence by hiring ourselves to rivet their chains on the necks of our fellow sufferers. Thomas Jefferson, The Making of America, p. 395.
Since March 9, 1933, the United States has been in a state of declared national emergency. In fact, there are now in effect 4 precedentially proclaimed states of national emergency, in addition to the national emergency declared by President Roosevelt in 1933. There are also the national emergency proclaimed by President Truman on December 16, 1950, during the Korean conflict, and the states of national emergency declared by President Nixon on March 23, 1970, and August 15, 1971. These proclamations give force to 470 provisions of federal law, hundreds more since 1973, particularly in the Clinton administration since January 21, 1993. These hundreds of statutes delegate to the President extraordinary powers, ordinarily exercised by the Congress, which affect the lives of American citizens in a host of all-encompassing manners. This vast range of powers, taken together, confers enough authority to rule the country without reference to normal constitutional processes. Under the powers delegated by these statutes, the President may seize property, organize and control the means of production, seize commodities, assign military forces abroad, institute martial law, seize and control all transportation and communication, regulate the operation of private enterprise, restrict travel, and, in a plethora of particular ways, control the lives of all American citizens. In 1945, the United States gave up any remaining national sovereignty when it signed the United Nations Treaty, making all American citizens subject to United Nations jurisdiction. The Constitution of the United Nations may be compared to that of the old Soviet Union.
Here are just a few executive orders that would suspend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. These executive orders have been on record for nearly 30 years and could be enacted by the stroke of a presidential pen. Executive Order 10990 allows the government to take over all modes of transportation and control of highways and seaports. Executive Order 10995 allows the government to seize and control the communication media. Executive Order 10997 allows the government to take over all electrical power, gas, petroleum, fuels and minerals. Executive Order 10998 allows the government to take over all food resources and farms. Executive Order 11000 allows the government to mobilize civilians into work brigades under government supervision. Executive Order 11001 allows the government to take over all health, education and welfare functions. Executive Order 11002 designates the Postmaster General to operate a national registration of all persons. Executive Order 11003 allows the government to take over all airports and aircraft, including commercial aircraft. Executive Order 11004 allows the Housing and Finance Authority to relocate communities, build new housing with public funds, designate areas to be abandoned, and establish new locations for populations. Executive Order 11005 allows the government to take over railroads, inland waterways and public storage facilities. Executive Order 11051 specifies the responsibility of the Office of Emergency Planning and gives authorization to put all executive orders into effect in times of increased international tensions and economic or financial crisis. Executive Order 11310 grants authority to the Department of Justice to enforce the plans set out in executive orders, to institute industrial support, to establish judicial and legislative liaison, to control all aliens, to operate penal and correctional institutions, and to advise and assist the President. Without congressional approval, the President now has the power to transfer whole populations to any part of the country, the power to suspend the press and to force a national registration of all persons. The President, in essence, has dictatorial powers never provided to him under the Constitution.
17, 1980, the President and Senate confirmed another constitution, namely, the Constitution of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, found at Senate, Treaty Document No. 97-19, 97th Congress, First Session. A perusal of this foreign constitution should more than qualify the internationalist intents. The preamble, Article 1, Objectives, and Article 2, Functions, clearly evidences their intent to direct, control, finance and subsidize all natural and human resources and agro-related as well as basic industries, through dynamic social and economic changes, with a view to assisting in the establishment of a new international economic order. The high-flown rhetoric is obviously of communist origin and intents. An unelected, unrepresentative, unaccountable oligarchy of expatriates and aliens, who fraudulently claim in the preamble that they intend to establish rational and equitable international economic relations, yet openly declared that they no longer stabilize the value of the dollar nor assure the value of the coin and currency of the United States, is purely misrepresentation, deceit and fraud. See Public Law 95-147, 91 Stat. 1227, at pg. 1229. This was augmented by Public Law 101-167, 103 Stat. 1195, which discloses massive appropriations of rehypothecated debt credit for the general welfare and common defense of other foreign powers, including communist countries of satellites, international control of natural and human resources, etc., etc. A resource is a claim of property and when related to people constitutes slavery. It is now necessary to ask which constitution they are operating under. The Constitution for the New States of the United States, which was located at Liberty Lobby, 300 Independence Avenue, Southeast Washington, D.C. 20003, was the subject matter of the book entitled The Emerging Constitution by Rexford G. Tugwell, which was accomplished under the auspices of the Rockefeller Tax-Exempt Foundation called the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions. The people and citizens of this nation were forewarned against formation of democracies. Democracies have ever been the spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. See Federalist Papers No. 10, also see, The Law, Frederick Bastiat, Code of Professional Responsibility, Preamble. This alien constitution, however, has nothing to do with democracy in reality. It is the basis of and for a despotic, tyrannical oligarchy. Article 1, Rights and Responsibilities, Sections 1 and 15 evidence their knowledge of the emergency. The rights of expression, communication, movement, assembly, petition and habeas corpus are all accepted from being exercised under and in a declared emergency. The Constitution for the New States of America openly declares, among other seditious things and delusions, that until each indicated change in the government shall 714 have been completed the provisions of the existing Constitution and the organs of government shall be in effect. See Article 12, Section 3, all operations of the national government shall cease as they are replaced by those authorized under this Constitution. See Article 12, Section 4. This is
Colonel House, left, puppeteer of presidents, a quote, famously attributed to Rothschild agent Call. Edward House, but rarely understood except by one man in a million, envisages people as collateral on the national debt. Very soon, every American will be required to register their biological property in a national system designed to keep track of the people and that will operate under the ancient system of pledging. By such methodology, we can compel people to submit to our agenda, which will affect our security as a chargeback for our fiat paper currency. Every American will be forced to register or suffer not being able to work and earn a living. They will be our chattel, and we will hold the security interest over them forever, by operation of the law merchant under the scheme of secured transactions. Americans, by unknowingly or unwittingly delivering the bills of lading to us will be rendered bankrupt and insolvent, forever to remain economic slaves through taxation, secured by their pledges. They will be stripped of their rights and given a commercial value designed to make us a profit and they will be none the wiser, for not one man in a million could ever figure our plans and, if by accident one or two would figure it out, we have in our arsenal plausible deniability. After all, this is the only logical way to fund government, by floating liens and debt to the registrants in the form of benefits and privileges. This will inevitably reap to us huge profits beyond our wildest expectations and leave every American a contributor to this fraud which we will call social insurance. Without realizing it, every American will insure us for any loss we may incur and in this manner, every American will unknowingly be our servant, however begrudgingly. The people will become helpless and without any hope for their redemption and, we will employ the high office of the president of our dummy corporation to foment this plot against America. If you can decipher what this means, you will truly understand a massive piece of the global agenda. J.R. 192 superseded public law. What passes as law today is only color of law, replacing it with public policy. This eliminated our ability to pay our debts, allowing only for their discharge. When we use any commercial paper, checks, drafts, warrants, Federal Reserve notes, etc., and accept it as money, we simply pass the unpaid debt attached to the paper onto others, by way of our purchases and transactions. This unpaid debt, under public policy, now carries a public liability for its collection. In other words, all debt is now public. The United States government, in order to provide necessary goods and services, created a commercial bond promissory note, by pledging the property, labor, life and body of its citizens, as payment for the debt bankruptcy. This commercial bond made chattel property out of every man, woman and child in the United States. We became nothing more than human resources and collateral for the debt. This was without our knowledge and/or our consent. How? It was done through the filing registration of our birth certificates. The United States government, actually the elected and appointed administrators of government, took, and still do, to this day, certified copies of all our birth certificates and placed them in the United States Department of Commerce, as registered securities. These securities, each of which carries an estimated $1 million value, have been, and still are, circulated around the world as collateral for loans, entries on the asset side of ledgers, etc., just like any other security. There's just one problem: we didn't authorize it. The United States is a District of Columbia corporation. In Volume 20, Corpus Juris Sec., Section 1785, we find the United States government as a foreign corporation with respect to a state. See N.Y. Re. Miriam 36 N.E. 505-1441 S 0.1973, 14 L. ed. 287. Since a corporation is a fictitious person, it cannot speak, see, touch, smell, etc., it cannot, by itself, function in the real world. It needs a conduit, a transmitting utility, a liaison of some sort to connect the fictional person and fictional world in which it exists, to the real world. Living people exist in a real world, not a fictional, virtual world. But government does exist in a fictional world, and can only deal directly with other fictional or virtual persons, agencies, states, etc. In order for a fictional person to deal with real people, there must be a connection, a liaison, and a go-between. This can be something as simple as a contract. When both persons, the real and the fictional, agree to the terms of a contract, there is a connection, intercourse, dealings, there is a communication, an exchange, an understanding. There is business. But there is another way for fictional government to deal with the real man and woman, through the use of a representative, a liaison, and the go-between. Who is this go-between, this liaison that connects fictional government to real men and women? It's a government-created shadow, a fictional character with the exact same name as ours. This person was created by using our birth certificates as the manufacturer's certificate of origin (MCO) and the state in which we were born as the port of entry. This gave fictional government a fictional person with whom to deal directly. This person is called a straw man. Stramineus homo, Latin, a man of straw, one of no substance, put forward as bail or surety.
The capital in Iowa City sits empty because basically all the free people in the Republic have expatriated to the jurisdiction of the United States and under the 14th Amendment are citizens of its subdivision, State of Iowa, and subject to the jurisdiction of its statutes. As subjects, most people elect representatives to pass such things as seat belt laws and driver license statutes for their insurance companies that insure them. Free men practice strict liability under the common law, and don't affect any public interest whatsoever. When a free man of the Republic is dragged into court, it will be presumed that he is a subject with a social security number, thereby affecting a public interest and needs to be regulated under public policy. This presumption needs to be properly destroyed if we want to be free. Colors and standards are more nearly square than flags and are made of silk with a knotted fringe of yellow on three sides. Use of the flag. The most general and appropriate use of the flag is as a symbol of authority and power. The reason I started with the flag issue is because it is so easy to grasp. The main problem I have with the yellow fringe is that by its use our constitutional republic is no more. Our system of law was changed without the public's knowledge. It was kept secret. This is fraud. The American people were allowed to believe this was just a decoration. Because the law changed from common law, God's law, to admiralty law, the king's law, your status also changed from sovereign to subject. From being able to own property, allodial title, to not owning property, tenant on the land. If you think you own your property, stop paying taxes, it will be taken under the prize law. The ultimate ownership of all property is in the state. Individual so-called ownership is only by virtue of government, i.e., law, amounting to a mere user, and use must be in accordance with law and subordinate to the necessities of the state. Senate Document No. 43, Contracts Payable in Gold, written in 1933. By our allowing these military flags to fly, the American people have admitted our defeat and loss of status. Record, Congressman dies, March 15, 1933. Before 1933 all contracts with the government were payable in gold. Now I ask you, who in their right mind would enter into contracts totaling $100 billion in gold, when there was only $11 billion in gold in the whole world, and we had about $4 billion? To keep from being hung by the American public, Congress obeyed the banksters' demands and turned over our country to them. They never came out and said we were in bankruptcy, but the fact remains, we are. In 1933 the gold of the whole country had to be turned in to the banksters, and all government contracts in gold were cancelled. This is bankruptcy. The Bankruptcy of the United States. United States Congressional Record, March 17, 1993. Volume 33, page H1303. Mr. Speaker, we are here now in Chapter 11. Members of Congress are official trustees presiding over the greatest reorganization of any bankrupt entity in world history, the U.S. government. It is an established fact that the United States federal government has been dissolved by the Emergency Banking Act, March 9, 1933, 48 Stat. 1, Public Law 89-719, declared by President Roosevelt, being bankrupt and insolvent. H.J.R. 192, 73rd Congress M. Session June 5, 1933. Joint resolution to suspend the gold standard and abrogate the gold clause dissolved the sovereign authority of the United States and the official capacities of all United States governmental offices, officers, and departments, and is further evidence that the United States federal government exists today in name only. The receivers of the United States bankruptcy are the international bankers, via the United Nations, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. All United States offices, officials, and departments are now operating within a de facto status in name only under emergency war powers. With the constitutional Republican form of government now dissolved, the receivers of the bankruptcy have adopted a new form of government for the United States. This new form of government is known as a democracy, being an established socialist, communist order under a new governor for America. This act was instituted and established by transferring and/or placing the office of the Secretary of Treasury to that of the Governor of the International Monetary Fund. Covered the main nexus, the money. I didn't make up this information. It is the government's own documents and legal definitions taken from their dictionaries. I wish the hard-working Americans in the government that are loyal to an American republic could read this. The more people that know the truth the better. July 26, 1935. The Federal Register Act enabled the President to create unlimited bureaucracies and empower them with the force of law. All that was needed to implement bureaucratic regulations into law was to enter or publish those regulations in the Federal Register, by passing all constitutional oversight. The Buck Act. October 9, 1940. Congress in 1940 passed the Buck Act 4 USCS 104-113. By clever legal maneuvers from 1935 to 1940, the feds entirely circumvented the U.S. Constitution. In Section 110(e), this act allowed any department of the federal government to create a federal area for imposition of the Public Salary Tax Act of 1939. The imposition of this tax is at 4 USCS Section 111, and the rest of the taxing law is in Title 26, the Internal Revenue Code. The Social Security Board had already created an overlay of a federal area. As a result, the federal government created federal states, which are exactly like the sovereign states, occupy the same territory and boundaries, but whose names are capitalized versions of the sovereign states. Remember that proper names and proper nouns in the English language have only the first letter capitalized. For example, the federal state of Illinois is overlaid upon the sovereign state of Illinois. Further, it is designated by the federal abbreviation of IL, instead of the sovereign state abbreviation of IL, so too is Arizona designated as instead of the lawful abbreviation of ARIZ, CA instead of CALIF, etc. If you use a two-letter capitalized abbreviation, you're declaring that the location is under the jurisdiction of the federal government instead of the powers of the sovereign state. As a result of creating these shadow states, the federal government assumes that every area is a federal area, and that the citizens therein are federal citizens. The Story of the Buck Act, authored by Richard McDonald, edited by Mitch Modeleski. In order for you to understand the full import of what is happening, certain laws must be explained to you. When passing new statutes, the federal government always does everything according to the principles of law. In order for the federal government to tax a citizen of one of the several states, they had to create some sort of contractual nexus. This contractual nexus is the Social Security number. In 1935, the federal government instituted Social Security. The Social Security Board then created 10 Social Security districts. The combination of these districts resulted in a federal area which covered all the several states like a clear plastic overlay. See map on page 50. In 1939, the federal government instituted the Public Salary Tax Act of 1939. This act is a municipal law of the District of Columbia for taxing all federal and state government employees and those who live and work in any federal area. Now, the government knows that it cannot tax state citizens who live and work outside the territorial jurisdiction of Article 1 Section 8, Clause 17 1, 817 or Article 4 Section 3, Clause 2 4, 3-2 in the U.S. Constitution. So, in 1940, Congress passed the Buck Act, 4 U.S.C.S. Sections 105 to 113. In Section 110(e), the Act authorized any department of the federal government to create a federal area for imposition of the Public Salary Tax Act of 1939. This tax is imposed at 4 U.S.C.S. Sec. 111. The rest of the taxing law is found in the Internal Revenue Code.
National Congress works for two nations foreign to each other, and by legal cunning both are called the United States. One is the Union of Sovereign States, under the Constitution, termed in this article the Continental United States. The other is a legislative democracy which has its origin in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution, here termed the Federal United States. Very few people, when they see some law passed by Congress, ask themselves, which nation was Congress working for when it passed this or that so-called law? Or, few ask, does this particular law apply to the continental citizenry of the Republic, or does this particular law apply only to residents of the District of Columbia and other named enclaves, or territories, of the democracy called the Federal United States? Since these questions are seldom asked by the uninformed citizenry of the Republic, it was an open invitation for cunning political leadership to seek more power and authority over the entire citizenry of the Republic through the medium of legalese. Congress deliberately failed in its duty to provide a medium of exchange for the citizenry of the Republic, in harmony with its constitutional mandate. Instead, it created an abundance of commercial credit money for the legislative democracy, where it was not bound by constitutional limitations. Then, after having created an emergency situation, and a tremendous depression in the Republic, Congress used its emergency authority to remove the remaining substance, gold and silver, from the medium of exchange belonging to the Republic, and made the negotiable instrument paper of the legislative democracy Federal United States a legal tender for continental United States citizenry to use in the discharge of debts. At the same time, Congress granted the entire citizenry of the two nations the benefit of limited liability in the discharge of all debts by telling the citizenry that the gold and silver coins of the Republic were out of date and cumbersome. The citizens were told that gold and silver substance was no longer needed to pay their debts, that they were now privileged to discharge debt with this more convenient currency, issued by the Federal United States. Consequently, everyone was forced to go modern, and to turn in their gold as a patriotic gesture. The entire news media complex went along with the scam and declared it to be a forward step for our democracy, no longer referring to America as a republic. From that time on, it was a falling light for the Republic of 1776, and a rising light for Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal democracy, which overcame the Depression, which was caused by a created shortage of real money. There was created an abundance of debt paper money, so-called, in the form of interest-bearing negotiable instrument paper called Federal Reserve Notes, and other forms of paperwork credit instruments. Since all contracts since Roosevelt's time have the colorable consideration of Federal Reserve notes, instead of a genuine consideration of silver and gold coin, all contracts are colorable contracts, and not genuine contracts. The leader who bangs the drums of war in order to whip the citizenry into a patriotic fervor, for patriotism is indeed a double-edged sword. It both emboldens the blood, just as it narrows the mind. And when the drums of war have reached a fever pitch and the blood boils with hate and the mind has closed, the leader will have no need in seizing the rights of the citizenry. Rather, the citizenry, infused with fear and blinded by patriotism, will offer up all of their rights unto the leader, and gladly so. How do I know? For this is what I have done. And I am Caesar. Julius Caesar.
Asked my master how our system is different from those evil masters. He said, in our system, masters work for the slaves. No longer confused, I am beginning to accept his logic. Now I see it. Slaves are in control of their masters, because they can choose new masters every few years. When the masters appear to control the slaves in between elections, it is all a grand delusion. In reality, they are carrying out the slaves' desires. For if this was not so, they would not have been chosen in the last election. How clear it is to me now. I shall never doubt the system again. My master is a good man.
My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. Proverbs chapter 1 verse 10 King James Bible. All past, present, or future commercial, legal, or political participation within the state of Illinois, state, United States, United Nations, and Crown, including any related subsidiary, franchise, political subdivision, or participatory corporate entity, shall be considered acts under duress, protest, and without prejudice until such a time as we, the men, women, and children non-immigrant strangers and non-resident aliens living upon the soil, who constitute the children of God, return to nature's only true and just system of law, God's law. Additionally, this flesh and blood withdrawal of consent includes but is not limited to any voter registration that results in the institution of a privileged political body or corporate government foreign to God's laws, any fictional or corporate diminishment of man's natural physical existence and lawful standing or status within or without the state foreign to God's laws, any forum whatsoever administrated by a fiction or an impostor foreign to God's laws, any fiction of law, corporate state, political subdivision, agency, franchise, subsidiary, entity, office, extension, department, foreign to God's laws, any debt-based, non-equitable, currency or negotiable instrument devoid of value, or any system of usury, foreign to God's laws, any fictional encumbrance, trusteeship, contract, citizenship, suretyship, joint venture, impressment, employment, license, registration, certification, enrollment, entitlement, act, action, statute, or regulation, foreign to God's laws. Let it be known that on this very day, I, Curtis Richard, a private sui juris non-immigrant stranger, non-resident alien, bona fide man of sound mind and creation of God, one of the true physical inheritors of God's earth and unconditional sole steward of all that is my existence as a gift from God, seal by the blood of my own hand, the actions of political expatriation, purgatory oath, and withdrawal of consent, reclaiming the rule of God's law and the laws of nature and thus my God-given unalienable rights, and until the truth is revealed to all others, a return to the founding principles of the unanimous Declaration of Independence, any possible protections available by the organic Illinois Constitution, Organic Constitution for the United States of America, and Bill of Rights. And that from this day forward, any trespass upon God's creation, by any fictional creation of man, shall be rendered, ab initio, invalid, unlawful, null and void. I have never authorized by my own hand or blood, and by my own free will, consciously, and with full disclosure, consented to any man-created status or fiction foreign to God's law, such as that of the 14th Amendment United States citizen. In fact, no man or woman of God would ever knowingly agree to, assent to, authorize, or consent to any fictional creation of man over the law and rule of God. To be clear, as a man designated to be an inheritor, custodian, and steward of God's earth, I will never, by consent or force, break that trust by relinquishing any of my liability, authority, or dominion to a fictional representation of my existence. To this truth, on this day, I do seal forever by the blood of my own hand.